A sinister, loud growling echoed over the village. But it wasn't the sound of a wild beast. It was the rumble of Zora's 5 hefty husbands, who had not a scrap of food left for dinner. Zora, as thin as a blade of grass, just smiled while standing by the door. She wasn't just a wife, she was the wife of 5 men, each one weighing as much as 3 buffaloes. And today she had decided, enough. Let them find out what real hunger is. Once upon a time, in a distant African village, there lived Zora, a woman as slender as a young palm tree and as swift as a gazelle. Her grace and lightness always sparked envy among the women and admiration from the men. But Zora's life was anything but ordinary. She was married to the 5 heaviest men in the village, and each of them had a story of his own. The first husband, Capo, was a famous baker. His buns and pies flew off the shelves faster than he could bake them. But with each batch of dough, his own figure seemed to grow along with the bread. People joked that if Capo ever fell into his oven, he'd bake right alongside his buns. Despite his impressive size, Capo was a kind-hearted man. His belly would bounce in rhythm with his laughter as he told his friends how he once ate an entire basket of bread in one sitting. The second husband, Nguma, was a trader, and his passion for bananas was legendary. "Only bananas give me the energy to work," he would insist to everyone. He sold fabrics, jewelry, and even animals, but he never parted with his beloved bunch of bananas. Nguma was so consumed by his trade that he often lost track of how many bananas he ate in a day. When he walked through the market, the scent of fresh bananas trailed behind him, as if he were a walking fruit tree. The villagers even joked that if Nguma ever fell, bananas would spill out of him like they do from branches. The third husband, Lobo, was the village elder. No one questioned his wisdom, but his appetite was a frequent topic of conversation around every campfire. Lobo claimed that his weight was a symbol of his many years of experience and knowledge. "The more you eat, the more you know," he would say. However, the villagers often noticed that his knowledge mostly revolved around the best ways to cook and where to find the tastiest meals. Lobo loved to sit in his chair and grandly speak about the importance of food in everyone's life. His belly was so large that when he sat down, the ground would give way slightly beneath him, though no one dared mention it aloud. The fourth husband, Juma, was a hunter. One would think his profession required agility and speed, but Juma made up for all his efforts with enormous feasts on the way back. Every time he brought home a catch, he'd nearly devour it all by himself. Neighbors joked that Juma didn't eat to live, but lived to eat. "I hunt animals and food hunts me," he'd laugh as he swallowed yet another piece of meat. Over time, his belly grew so large that he stopped wearing a belt for his hunting knife. He just tied it around his thigh instead. And finally, the fifth husband, Kamba, was the village blacksmith. He was known not only for his ironwork, but also for his enormous appetite. Kamba always said, "A blacksmith needs fuel, not just for the fire, but for himself too." His day would begin with a huge breakfast that lasted right up until lunch, which smoothly transitioned into dinner. Everyone knew that when Kamba was eating, it was best to stay far away from his hammer. He'd get so absorbed in his meal that he might accidentally miss his mark. Zora couldn't help but laugh as she watched her husbands. On the one hand, she loved them for their kindness and hard work. On the other, it seemed their attachment to food had become something far greater than just a need for sustenance. Why are they so fat? And why is each of them so obsessed with food? She wondered to herself. Over time, this thought began to trouble her more and more. Living with 5 men wasn't just difficult because of their enormous appetites, but exhausting. Each of them demanded individual attention. Capo craved new recipes. Guma was always on the hunt for more bananas. Lobo constantly demanded respect for his experience and wisdom. Juma hosted feasts even when there was no game, and Kamba hammered away at his tools, never forgetting about food. One night, Zora decided she had to get to the bottom of what was truly behind their weight. She recalled stories from the village's elder women about ancient magic that could influence food and those who ate it. Could her husbands be under some kind of spell? Or was it simply their weak will? Determined to find out, Zora decided to conduct an experiment. Morning came, and Zora, full of determination, was ready to execute her clever experiment. She quietly got out of bed before her 5 husbands stirred. Under the cover of darkness, she hid all the food supplies in the house. Bread, bananas, meat, even the spices Capo used for his baking. She gathered everything into a deep chest, carefully covering it with an old blanket and stashing it in the basement. Everything was set for the test. Capo was the first to wake, reaching for his baking board. The ritual of kneading dough each morning was sacred to him, and he could already imagine the warm bread rising in the oven. But instead of the usual sacks of flour and grain, he found only emptiness. His face grew so forlorn that Zora, watching from around the corner, had to stifle her laughter. "Zora, where's the flour?" Capo exclaimed, his eyes wide with shock as he stared at the empty shelves. Next to wake was Numa, who immediately went to grab his bananas for his traditional fruit breakfast. But to his horror, he too discovered that the bananas were gone. "What's happening? The bananas are missing." He panicked, glancing around as if expecting a banana tree to magically appear inside the house. Juma, the hunter, woke up with thoughts of the leftover meat from last night's dinner. He approached the cupboard with such enthusiasm that he didn't notice it was empty at first. "No meat? What kind of day is this?" he muttered, starting to feel uneasy. Lobo, the elder, was the last to rise, and as always began his day with a wise proclamation. "Breakfast is the key to success, for he who eats in the morning rules the day." However, it wasn't long before he realized there was no prepared food, and he frowned. His usual morning routine was now in jeopardy. Kamba, the blacksmith, always demanded a hefty breakfast to fuel his strength. He was the first to notice that the kitchen was devoid of the usual aromas of roasted meat and bread. "Where is everything? Without food, I can't even swing my hammer," he exclaimed, shaking his head ominously. Zora, barely holding back her laughter, quietly watched as her husbands fell headfirst into the trap. The men began to panic, completely at a loss for what to do. One by one, they scurried around the house, checking cupboards, lifting pot lids, and peeking under tables. Even Lobo, usually so dignified, was running his hand along the walls, as if hoping food might miraculously appear. "How is this possible?" Lobo finally said, beginning to accept the hunger. "The important question is not where the food is, but why it disappeared. Perhaps this is a test for us, a test of our wisdom." Zora couldn't hold back any longer and burst into laughter. Hearing her giggles, all 5 men froze in place. "Zora, did you set this up?" Capo asked cautiously, narrowing his eyes. "Well, of course," Zora admitted, stepping out from her hiding spot. "I just wanted to see what you would do without food." "What will we do? We're doomed," Nguma exclaimed, still frantically searching the kitchen for even a single banana. However, Lobo, deep in thought, raised a finger to his chin and spoke. "Perhaps Zora wants to teach us a lesson. We as men are too dependent on food, and it seems this is preventing us from realizing our true strengths." The husbands, shocked by his words, froze in place. Even Kamba, who was usually consumed by thoughts of roasted meat, looked at Lobo with curiosity. "You're right," Capo slowly said, scratching his belly in contemplation. "Maybe food isn't just sustenance for the body. Perhaps there's a power within it that we have yet to uncover." And so began the strangest part of their day. The husbands suddenly decided they needed more than just food. They concluded that after all these years of gorging on bread, bananas, and meat, they had missed something important. Perhaps there was a kind of magic in food that gave them strength, and they needed to find a way to activate it. Lobo, as the elder and wise man, declared, "In ancient tales, it is said that deep within the forest lives a sorcerer who knows the secret of the power of food. If we find him, he may teach us how to unlock our abilities." "A sorcerer?" Juma echoed, already imagining himself hunting down the sorcerer to uncover this secret. "Yes," Lobo replied solemnly, "but the path to him is not an easy one. They say only the strongest can traverse it." Zora watched the scene with a smirk. She understood that her husbands were willing to do anything for food, even embark on the strangest adventures. However, she realized that this journey could be a perfect opportunity for her. The path to the sorcerer led through narrow trails and treacherous forests, where one needed to be not only strong, but also agile. And her 5 husbands were unlikely to handle that. "If you want to find the sorcerer," she said with a sly smile, "I will go with you. I'm the only one who can guide you through the forest." The husbands nodded, albeit hesitantly. It was clear to them that they wouldn't manage without Zora. And so, with this decision made, they set off on a journey filled with unexpected challenges, laughter, and secrets hidden deep within the woods. Zora and her 5 husbands set off at dawn. The forest they entered was mysterious and dense, its narrow paths hidden beneath the canopies of trees, and the sounds of wildlife were both strange and eerie. Capo walked at the front, breathing heavily but confidently, forging the way. His large belly swayed slightly, each step reminding everyone of his passion for food. Nguma, waving his arms, kept scanning the underbrush in the hope of spotting at least one banana, but there wasn't a single fruit tree in sight. Lobo walked at the center, solemnly discussing the ancient legends. The sorcerer we seek has lived for centuries. His knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation, and in his hands lies the power of food. If we prove our resilience, he will reveal to us the great secret. And what if we don't prove ourselves? Yuma grumbled, pondering whether it would be better to return to hunting beasts rather than seeking wisdom. Then we will remain as we are, hungry. Kamba retorted, barely managing to keep up as he lagged behind the others. Zora walked silently beside them, watching as her husbands gradually lost their confidence. The path was arduous. The trails became increasingly tangled, and time dragged on. The men, used to instant gratification when it came to food, struggled to understand how they could go so long without a snack. "How about we stop for lunch?" Nguma suggested, barely resisting the urge to search for something edible by that point. "There's no lunch," Zora snapped. "If you want lunch, find the sorcerer." This continued until evening, when the group finally reached a hut that could easily be mistaken for a pile of old logs. It was covered in moss, and its doorway seemed too narrow for such large men. From the dark window, the sorcerer peered out. His eyes gleamed when he saw the group before him. "I know why you have come," he said, slowly stepping into the light. His figure was so thin and agile that it seemed he was part of the shadow itself. "The power of food calls to you, but to receive it, you must pass a trial." The husbands exchanged glances. Even the elder Lobo fell silent and squinted. "What is the trial?" Kamba asked, already imagining himself with a knife and fork in front of a large piece of roasted meat. "You must spend a day without food," the sorcerer smiled, and his teeth gleamed in the darkness. "Only those who can endure this trial will unlock the power that has always been hidden within them." The faces of the 5 husbands fell. A day without food? That sounded like torture. But why? Numa frowned. "Food gives us energy. We eat to live." "And you live to eat," the sorcerer retorted. "Your obsession has made you weak. Only by overcoming hunger will you understand the true nature of strength." Despite their doubts, the husbands agreed to undergo the trial. They settled around the sorcerer's hut and began their long day without food. At first, everything went well. Capo talked about his favorite recipes, trying to distract everyone from thoughts of food. Lobo shared an old legend about how in ancient times people survived without food for weeks, relying solely on their inner strength. But by noon, the husbands' faces grew more somber. Nguma began to fidget nervously, his gaze darting around in search of at least one banana. Juma clutched his stomach, which was rumbling loudly. Kamba, usually strong and calm, looked at Zora with a pitiful expression. "Are you sure you didn't hide any food?" "No," she replied curtly. "This is your chance to prove that you can handle it." Capo, the baker, was breathing heavily and kept touching his stomach, as if hoping it would magically fill up on its own. Lobo tried to maintain a wise demeanor, but the hungry longing in his eyes was hard to miss. As evening approached, the situation grew increasingly comical. The husbands, once majestic and self-assured, looked bewildered. Capo started saying that he saw bread calling his name. Nguma picked up a stick and began to swing it, imagining it was a bunch of bananas. Juma even tried to hunt his own shadow, claiming it reminded him of his old hunting trophies. The sorcerer, watching their pitiful attempts, couldn't hold back his laughter. His hoarse chuckle echoed through the forest as the husbands surrendered one by one. "Enough, I can't take it anymore," yelled Juma, throwing his spear to the ground. "I'm ready to eat even the roots of these trees." Kamba sat down, staring blankly at one spot. "There's no point, I can't hold on." Nguma, barely on his feet, quietly whispered, "Bananas, bananas." At that moment, Zora, remaining calm and composed, approached the sorcerer. "You have passed the trial," he said, looking at her with respect. "You are the only one who maintained clarity of mind and endured a day without food." "And what about my husbands?" she asked, a sly smile on her face. "Did they not succeed?" The sorcerer laughed. "Your husbands are great eaters, but not so strong in spirit. Their strength has always been in their talent for consuming food, but not within themselves." Zora, understanding that her husbands had failed, walked over to them. "You were ready to do anything for food," she said. "But the true strength lies in the ability to control oneself." The sorcerer, nodding, granted Zora the power to control all the food supplies in the village. Upon returning home, Zora not only became the most respected woman in the area, but also the only one who managed the entire cooking process. Her husbands, realizing their mistakes, became more modest in their desires, although their bellies remained large. Now, every time they gathered at the table, Zora would just laugh. She knew that true strength lay not in food, but in the ability to manage one's desires. Since then, life in the village has changed. Zora, possessing new power, not only controlled the food supplies, but also taught her husbands to approach food wisely. She became a true culinary master, creating dishes that satisfied their enormous appetites while being healthy and nutritious. Every evening, as they gathered around the table, the husbands listened with pleasure to Zora as she shared stories about the importance of not just eating, but also appreciating every bite. They learned that food could be not only a means of survival, but also an art that requires respect and patience. "Zora, you have taught us so much," said Capo, wiping tears of joy after taking the first bite of the bread she had baked with love. "Now I understand that bread is not just food. It is the result of hard work and skill. And it's not just sustenance for the body," Guema added, happily chewing on a banana. "It's a way to share happiness with others." But one day, while Zora was preparing a special treat for the village festival, a stranger came to the village. He looked tired and hungry, his clothes dusty, and his eyes shone with desperation. "Please, give me some food," he said to Zora, his voice full of desperation. "I have been traveling for many days and haven't eaten anything." Zora paused, looking at him with compassion. Remembering how she once sought understanding and strength, she realized that her newfound power should be used not just for her family, but also to help others. "We have plenty of food," she replied with a smile. "Join us for dinner." The stranger looked at her in surprise, then nodded gratefully. In the evening, he sat at the table with Zora and her husbands, enjoying delicious food and a sense of community. "You're not just feeding us," he said. "You're giving us hope and friendship." As Zora looked at her husbands and the stranger, she realized that her true strength lay not only in her ability to manage the food supplies, but also in her capacity to share that food with others. She decided that every time her family gathered at the table, they would leave one place for someone in need. Since then, the village became known as a place where help was always welcomed, and Zora turned into a symbol of kindness and strength of spirit. Every holiday, when they gathered around the table, Zora proudly looked at her husbands and those who came to them for assistance. She knew that true wealth was not only in the abundance of food, but also in the ability to share that abundance with others. May your life be full of joy and limitless possibilities. Thanks for watching. Be sure to share your opinion and don't forget to write a comment. Subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video.